We are focused on trying to identify pain points in the industry and finding simple solutions to them. Today in residential solar, around 30% of solar systems that get installed require that the homeowner's main electrical panel needs to be upgraded. It's a big inconvenience for the homeowner. They're without power for a few days. It's a bigger inconvenience for the installer, the electrician, because the cost to do that is going to cost them an additional $2,000 to $4,000. Many times the utility says if you're upgrading that panel with all the fuses, you also now need to bring the lines from the street underground to the house. A friend of mine had to do that, it cost him $10,000. And so what we'll talk about today is how we can help eliminate that cost and that hassle. Additionally, when we have to do that, for many of solar contractors, around 20% of their customers cancel their purchase because of that unknown expense. So what we're trying to do is remove those obstacles. All right, quick introduction to our company. We're 5 years old. We're located in Southern California, San Diego County. We are a clean tech incubator focused on disruptive solutions. Our key technical focuses are interconnection, renewables, energy storage, EV charging. In our portfolio, we have around 30 or so patents, somewhere in the patent process. And current products that are on the market today are the product that we're talking about here is the B3 ByPass, as well as a tool that's used to help install the B3 ByPass and also has general applications to the electrical market. Called the Q-Strip tool. Myself, Paul DeClairemaker. In the back, we have Paul Cruz, who's our principal scientist, and we're very fortunate to have Jeff Hidaka, who is in charge of our development. He spent 32 years at UL and was their principal engineer for breakers. So B3 ByPass, what does it mean? It means Busbar bypass breaker. And what is the significance of this? So it is the first and only UL certified overcurrent protection device that does not touch the bus bar of the main panel. And I'll explain why this is important. Safety is a big issue. Many home fires, the leading cause of home fires is poor connection in the main panel, and we want to address that. The other reason is time. It's a big hassle for installers. An expense for the homeowner, an expense for the installer. We want to improve the customer experience, and we want to help increase the deployment of EVs, storage, and PV to the general marketplace. Nobody likes to do main panel upgrades. Installers in the room here, and when I travel the country and talk about it and say, does anybody like doing main panel upgrades? I've had one time where somebody raised their hand and their whole job was doing main panel upgrades for installers that hated doing it. So nobody likes it because of the cost. It's an unknown cost to the homeowner. When you're doing the main panel upgrade, you damage the house, you have to restucco it, the homeowner's upset because it doesn't match. There's a lot of issues that go along with it, and it's just a real disruption to the installation and sales process for most solar installers today. What does it do? So, as I mentioned before, we have no connection to the bus bar of the main panel. A standard breaker, if you look at the back of a standard breaker, this is how the back of it looks. On the B3 ByPass, the back of it looks like this. So the difference between these two is that on the standard breaker, we have copper connection points that allow the electrical connection between this breaker and the panel. And on the B3 ByPass, there's no electrical contact here. So that is what's unique. And this eliminates the connection, which means now we have more flexibility on how much solar or how much battery we can add to that existing panel. What does it do? So it allows us to connect on-site generation sources or loads, such as EV chargers, a spa, HVAC system that typically would require a main panel upgrade, and it connects them to the line side of the main service, not the load side. This is customer-owned equipment. The utility has no jurisdiction over this. That's part of the fear that many installers have is, hey, can we do this? Will the utility allow us to do it? It's customer-owned equipment, the main panel. We're installing this between the meter and the main breaker, and so there is no limitation from the utility on how we can do this. A quick diagram here to show you what it's doing. So this is a one-line diagram of a main panel, Here's the main breaker in yellow. This is the bus bars in the main breaker. You can see they're connected to the main breaker. The bus bars go out, and this is where the other breakers would be installed. Here's the B3 bypass, and as you can see, there's no contact to the bus bars here, so it's bypassing that. It's connecting directly to the feeder wires of the main breaker, thus the bus bar bypass. We can add up to 2 new loads or sources here, whether it's PV, whether it's battery storage, whether it's a traditional generator or loads. And here's some examples of what could be added. This is like the basic technical concept behind the product. All right, what does it do? So from a technical perspective, code perspective, we provide branch circuit protection and a disconnecting means that's required by the National Electric Code. And it provides that for both generation feeder circuits and or loads. It is a UL classified breaker. We've gone through all the testing at UL, both UL 489 and UL 67. UL 489 is the standard for a molded case circuit breaker. And then in addition to that, we had to go through the certification to be approved by UL for installation in panel boards from all the major leading panel board manufacturers. So our compatibility list is over 1,000 panel boards from all the current panel boards on the market and some of the legacy panel boards that are out there today. So what is a UL classified breaker? The classified breaker program means that when it has a UL listing, it now can be installed in other manufacturers' panel boards. So if you have a Schneider, a Square D, Eaton, GE, and we're listed on the compatibility list, then the B3 bypass can be installed in that main panel. It also means that the breaker, the B3 bypass in this case, has satisfied all the testing parameters for a typical circuit breaker. And then we are compatible with with panels that accept 1-inch main breakers and 1-inch stab-in breakers. It will not work with panel boards that accept 3/4-inch breakers. Today, we are allowed to be installed in over 1,000 different main panels. How does it work? So this is the actual product. If I take away this part here, it looks like a typical breaker. This would be a quad breaker, which means it's a two-pole breaker, which means we have 2 points where we can put in 2 different generation sources or 2 different loads or a combination of each. So this is like any standard 2-inch format quad breaker. And then the difference is the bus bar that allows us to attach directly to the line side. Since it is a quad breaker, it's assembled together and it provides feeder protection and disconnect for 2 separate sources or loads. The benefit of this, being a quad breaker, is you can mix and match sources and loads. Additionally, if there's not space in that main panel and you need to pull an existing breaker, you could pull that and you could land that load on one of the 2 poles, assuming that the feeder wires are rated to handle that load. If you're adding a new load to the B3, it's allowed, and NEC section 220.83a says you're allowed to add new loads to the line side, but you need to do a load calculation. So any questions on that? And we can help you out offline if you need to do a load calc. All right, technical specs. So the B3 bypass breaker is for single phase applications, 120, 240. Overcurrent protection in 10 amp increments from a 20-20 up to a 50-50 and all combinations in between. So for example, you could have a 20-40. If you need to pull, if you have a 100 amp service, you need to pull an existing 20 amp breaker, and then you want to add, let's say, a 7.6 kilowatt inverter to that 100 amp service. So that would be a 2040, and combinations all the way up to 50-50. We are working on a 60-60 that's currently going through UL testing. Maximum continuous current rating is 80 amps. Our current interruption rating is 10 kA, and the maximum feeder size that we can attach to is 2 aught, which is most 200 amp service panels. There's a very small number of 3 aught 200 amp service panels that we would not fit on, but anything 2 aught or smaller will fit on. On the quad breaker, you can land generation or loads 4 to 14 AWG. The warranty is 10 years. And then one comment I want to make here is we are made in the USA. We have a contract manufacturer that's located in Chicago. This contract manufacturer is over 70 years old. They made breakers for the Apollo space program and all the breakers for the space shuttle program. So we didn't want to cut any corners, and safety is first and foremost to us. So this manufacturer is very near UL. They do all of our UL testing with us and for us, and a lot of experience in making industrial quality breakers. A quick note on warranty. Some panel manufacturers make claims stating that you cannot put third-party breakers inside their panel. Well, Congress in 1975 passed an act which is known as the Consumer Protection Act. The official name is the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. And basically under that act, it states that a manufacturer cannot make their warranty contingent upon using manufacturer's only parts. So this would be similar to a car. And if you would replace a part in the car using a non-Ford part and you have a Ford car, they can't void the warranty. Some panel manufacturers are saying to installers you can't use the B3 because it's not made by them. Actually, that's not true. So I just wanted to highlight that. Next, let's quickly talk about the National Electric Code. So this is where the B3 really stands out and why it's unique. So National Electric Code, anybody who's designing systems should be aware of the 120% rule, which limits how much generation we can add to an existing load center, to an existing panel. So typically, we're limited by 120% of the Busbar rating. Since we're not connecting to the load side, instead we're connecting to the supply side, NEC 705.12a says that we are now allowed to add more than the 120% rule. So with this on a 100 amp service panel, you could go up to 100 amps of generation. So this is the unique thing about the B3. We're not connecting on the load side. Instead, we're connecting on the line side. By not connecting on the load side, we're not restricted by the 120% rule. And since we're connecting on the line side, we can go up to 100 amps of backfeed on that. An example of this today, without the B3, if you have a 100 amp service at this customer's home, the 100 amp service would allow a maximum of 20 amps of backfeed, which would be a 3.8 kilowatt inverter maximum. If the customer wanted a 5 kilowatt inverter, let's say 6 kilowatt array, 5 kilowatt inverter, you could not install that without doing a main panel upgrade. If they had a 200 amp service, the maximum inverter they could put on that would be a 7.6. With the B3 bypass, on a 100 amp service or a 200 amp service, you could have up to 100 amps of backfeed, which would be a 19 kW inverter. Or what you could do is have 10 amps, for example, a 10 kilowatt inverter, and then you could have energy storage on the other quad breaker, other part of the quad breaker. Again, the difference is we're not going on the load side, we're going on the line side. Because of that, a lot more flexibility, and what we're trying to do is help you eliminate having to do a main panel upgrade just because a customer would like to have larger PV than what traditionally was allowed. Resources. So on our website, our goal is to make sure that everything you need to both design, permit, and install is on our website. It's all downloadable. If you go to our website, QFE, which stands for QFEnergy002.com, on the resources page, we have our UL Certificate of Compliance. This document here, once again, it's viewable, and you can also download the PDF. We have our data sheet, which we'll hand out in a moment here. We have our UL compatibility list that lists all the panels that we're UL certified to be installed in. We have a sample plan set that's on there. We also have installation instructions. These are the official UL installation instructions. And then we have a quick guide, which is very pictorial, not too much text, makes it much more easier for the installers to understand. Additionally, if you go to our support page, we have a FAQ list that has a lot of questions and answers. This has been very helpful for counter people. If you submit a permit and somebody has questions, you can send them to that page. It has all the key questions that we've been seeing and many of the answers there. We also have a free mobile app. If you go to either the Android store or the iPhone App Store, we have a free app. You can download that from our webpage. I'm sorry, if you go to our webpage, it will take you to the link for either the Android download or the Apple App Store download. Our app has the B3 calculator to figure out what size B3 you would need. It also has a panel identifier, and if for some reason we can't identify it, it lets you upload a picture of the catalog number, and we'll get back to you and let you know if that panel is on the list. And then the installation guide is there. So we're trying, again, to make it very easy for installers to have the information they need at the job site or at the permit office, so it's readily available to them. Yeah, so the question is, the statement was, a lot of installers are using a line-side tap to get around this, and cost differences. So this does cost more than a line-side tap, but the big difference is, in the state of California, officially, line-side taps are not allowed, because you're damaging so they're typically insulation piercing taps. It's not a clean connection to the conductor, and typically if you do one, to make it legal, you need to have a UL field inspection. The cost for UL field inspection alone is anywhere from $1,500 on up, just to have UL come out and do the field inspection. The breaker cost itself, the B3 breaker, is less than half that price. It's sold through distribution. It's up to them to set the price. The other big advantage is the overcurrent protection is built into this, and we allow, it's a quad breaker, so you could have 2 generation sources added to it. Identifying suitable panel boards. So since we are considered a UL classified breaker, the maximum panel board we can be installed in is a 225 amp panel board or less. If you have a 400 amp panel board that has 2 200 amp main breakers, it cannot be installed. So this is a restriction by UL. It's a restriction that's part of the classified breaker program. So 100 amp, 115, 125 amp, 200 amp, 225 amp are all fine. The panel board must accept plug-in breakers. Again, we're gonna plug it in, not for the electrical connection, but more for the mechanical connection. So this is mechanically secured within the panel. It must accept 1-inch breakers because we use a 2-inch format quad breaker. So it needs to accept 1-inch stab-in breakers. The main breaker should be wire fed. We're working on some possible adapters for Busbar fed mains, but today it needs to be wire fed. And then typically we need at least 1 inch of unbent wire so we can be attached to it. So if this is the existing main, the B3 will be right here and will attach to the feeder wires of the main before they enter the main breaker. So basically we're connecting between the meter socket and the main breaker. All right. One little side note here, on the Siemens QN, we'll need a little bit more space because the QN is recessed from the breakers, and so we need just over 1.5 inches for that one. All right, we're here to help you. So what I say is, if you have a job that requires a main panel upgrade, If you send us 3 pictures, our team will review that job and give you a thumbs up or thumbs down whether or not the B3 can work. If you email to support@qfe002.com or just info@qfe002.com, we need 3 pictures. One of the catalog number of the main panel, so we can make sure it's on our compatibility list. Secondly, a picture of the main panel with the dead front removed. We want to make sure that it's wire fed, not bus bar fed. Thirdly, a close-up of the main breaker to make sure that we have enough room, unbent wires, so we can attach it. So we ask, please send us these pictures. We'll review it. We don't need address. We don't need any customer contact information. All we need is the meter, is the main panel information. And then we'll give you the go or no go on that job. We won't work on all of them because we do need the 1 inch of unbent. And by sending us this data, it also helps us figure out what adapters do we need to make for bus bar fed, what adapters do we need to make for some legacy panels, so we can be more flexible on how many panels we can get installed into. If you need to contact us, you can reach us at info@. We also have a toll-free phone number listed there. It's also on our website. And then where can you buy the B3? So Sonopar has the exclusives. Their operating companies on the West Coast are Codel, Independent Electric Supply, and OneSource Distribution. Some recommendations on getting the B3 onto a plan set. So what I'm going to go through here is what we believe are best practices. Our desire is, if you are wanting to install a B3, let's make sure that you don't have to do return trips to that office, and take 1 trip and get that plan set approved. So we recommend that you should include the following language. This is common language for any manufacturer's equipment, but we say installation must follow the guidance in compliance with the manufacturer's installation instructions. So we recommend you put that on. Additionally, connects energy sources to the line side of the main service disconnect. Again, put this on the plan set so the plan checkers, when you submit it, realize that it's the line side, which means we now no longer are limited by the NEC 120% rule of 20% backfeed. Okay. Add installer to verify that system short circuit current not to exceed 100 kA. Okay. And then we recommend that you include the following information. Include on your one line the B3 ByPass. Show it as part of the installation, as I showed early on in that one line at the beginning of the presentation. Identify the existing panel board, manufacturer and catalog number. And then what we recommend that you do, on the compatibility list, circle it so that they see that it's on there. Again, let's avoid any questions, any trips back to that office. You don't want to go back to the counter. Just take a few minutes, circle it, have your plan people circle it before you submit it. Remove any verbiage stating that the bypass breaker has to be installed at the opposite end of the bus bar from the main. That no longer applies because we're not on the load side, we're on the line side. Attach copies of the installation instructions, attach copies of the compatibility list, and the UL certification. This is just a best practice. If you know your counter people do not require hard copies, don't attach it. But what we've seen, it's a newer product. Attach as much as you can so they don't come back to you. Typically, those would be the 3 things. If they ask for anything, it's going to be, is it on the UL compatibility list? Where's the UL certificate? And where's the manufacturer's data sheet? Okay, and installation instructions. I'd like to quickly take you through the installation guide. We'll hand a copy out here, so everybody has a copy. All right, the breaker's included in the box. Also in the box are the split lug covers and an insulated cover for the split lugs. We also include a standoff kit that I'll explain. And then in every box, to make sure that inspectors, if they have any questions, we include paper copies of the compatibility list and the UL approved installation guide. We know you don't like extra paper at the job site, but it's a new product, and we want to make sure if the inspector says, where's the installation guide, where's the compatibility list, the hard copy's right here, okay? In addition to that, to do a proper installation, obviously first and foremost, personal protective gear, whatever you need to be working on voltage, high voltage. Additionally, the stripper tool. So we've made a tool that makes the stripping of the installation of the feeder wires very accurate and clean. I'll talk about this in a few more slides. AC voltmeter, Allen wrenches to torque down the lugs, and a torque driver. So those are the only tools that are needed to do the installation. Okay? Let's jump right in here to the installation process. So make sure the panel is on the compatibility list. This is redundant. If you email us, we'll give you the thumbs up, so you don't need to do this yourself. Just a quick reminder. Second reminder is we want to make sure there's enough unbent feeder wire so we can do a clean attachment here. So, third thing is on the side of the B3 is the torque specifications for the quad breaker. Okay, so based on the gauge wire you're going to use to land your new generation, we'll tell you what torque needs to be used. So here's the torque settings. Make sure you write that down, because once this is installed, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to see the side of this. Okay. And then next step to the installation process, pull the meter. Again, follow utility guidelines to do this. We want to make sure everybody's safe. Once you pull the meter, please do a measurement. We want to make sure that you're safe, everything's de-energized. Okay. Additionally, when the meter's pulled, if you're going to have people around, please use a non-conductive material to cover the meter socket. Just some typical best practices. All right, so we're going to need 2 inches of space to install this. If the feeder wires are coming in from the right, the 2 inches of space need to be above the main breaker. If the feeder wires are coming in from the left, the 2 inches need to be below the main breaker. Okay? Again, if you need to reconfigure breakers, go ahead and do it. If you don't have enough room and you need to pull a breaker, you could potentially add that load to one of the two poles, two poles of the breaker. Install the B3 physically into place. The reason why we want to do this is we want to see where on the feeder wires you're going to need to strip it to correctly mount the split lugs to those feeder wires. So we're going to install it. The base of the base of the split lugs will go underneath the feeder wires, and then we're going to have you mark that location with a Sharpie or with a tape, just so you know where to strip it. After you mark it, take the B3 back out, and now this is a step where you're going to use the tool. So we have the Q stripping tool, which you can look at it in the booth. You're going to go in, and there's a little window here where you can see where the marking was. Go in and close the Q stripper. You squeeze it down. It's got 6 cutting blades on it. You do a quick turn up and down of it, quick rotation against the feeder wire, and it will strip that installation without damaging the conductor. After you strip both feeder wires, then what you're going to do, here we show the top feeder wire stripped. We're stripping the bottom ones. Now they're both stripped, so you see the bare copper here. After that is done, you're going to reinstall the B3. So we're popping the B3 in right above the main breaker. We're sliding the split lug covers over the split lug bases. Just finger tighten them to keep them in place right here. And so now you have both split lug covers in place. It's a really, really simple installation. Once you do that, we want to make sure that you put a hold down kit in place. We include these little standoffs, cut them to size. We're going to go from the back of the B3 to the back of the panel. The reason for that is you will want to make sure, since the B3 is not controlled by the main breaker, if a homeowner turns off the main breaker, they're not going to yank out the B3 because that still is energized. So we have this little hold down kit. It's a little plastic standoff. We have two little screw openings here. You can just screw it right in place just to secure it so somebody doesn't pop it out. After you do that, you put the installation cover over the split lugs, that little plastic cover, pop it into place. There's two sides to it. The long end goes on the outside. Just pop it into place, and then you're gonna torque down those two hex screws to 100 inch-pounds, and you're done. Land whatever generation or loads you need to land to it, and it's fully installed. It's pretty straightforward. The magic to it, or once you get a bit more experience, is wedging it in there, because you have to get it underneath the feeder wires and you have 2 inches of space you're trying to pop it in. And then the key thing is marking where you're gonna strip it and use the right tool. Use the Q-stripper tool so you get a clean strip and you're not nicking one of those strands of that feeder wire. If you wanna position it somewhere else, then what you would do is you would run a jumper cable from the split lugs using the post adapter to where the main breaker is. So if we do have a a fixed main, you could use those jumper cables. I have some sample installation photos that we'd like to show you here. So 100 amp main breaker right here, the B3, and here we have 2 different generation sources attached to it. Another example here, B3 main breaker, 200 amp main breaker attached here, and we have 1 generation source added to that. Different configuration. This shows the Siemens QN, and it's the Siemens QN, and you can see how we need more unbent feeder wire here because the breaker's recessed a bit. So we need around 1.5 inches of unbent feeder wire. Thank you very much for your time.